I never thought I'd be the kind of girl who gets a fairy tale romance. Love was something other people had. Girls who grew up in warm houses with parents who hugged them, who had childhood photos framed on the walls and family dinners every Sunday. Not me. I grew up in foster care, shuffled between houses that smelled of cigarette smoke and cheap detergent. Love had always been a foreign language, something I understood in theory, but never in practice. And then I met Daniel. It started so simply, bumping into each other at a coffee shop, an awkward laugh, a casual conversation that stretched into something more. He was older than me, by maybe 6 or 7 years, but that only made him seem more mature and more composed. He had this quiet confidence about him, the kind that made me feel safe, like I belonged. We had been together for 4 months now, and with Valentine's Day just around the corner, I found myself caught up in a dizzying, unfamiliar feeling. Happiness. Daniel's house was beautiful, an old Victorian at the edge of town, nestled between bare winter trees. It was the kind of place you saw in magazines, with high ceilings and antique furniture, the wooden floors polished to a perfect shine. There was something eerie about it, though. It was too quiet. No neighbors nearby. No sounds of traffic. Just the creaking of old wood and the occasional whisper of wind against the windows. The first time I visited, I joked about it. This place feels haunted, I teased, running my hand along the intricate carvings on the staircase railing. Daniel had just smiled. Maybe it is. Maybe that's why I got such a good deal on it. I laughed, but there was something unreadable in his expression. I had been to his house many times since then, always enjoying the way he made me feel at home. He would cook for me, light candles in the dining room, play old jazz records on his vintage turntable. He was thoughtful in a way no one had ever been with me before, pulling out my chair before I sat, tucking my hair behind my ear when it fell into my face. But there was one rule. I wasn't allowed in the attic. I noticed the door on my second visit, a plain, unmarked wooden door at the end of the hallway upstairs. I had reached for the handle without thinking, assuming it led to another guest room or a storage closet. Daniel had stopped me. His hand had closed around my wrist, firm but gentle. "That's just the attic," he said. "There's nothing up there but old junk and probably some rats. You wouldn't like it." It was the first time I'd ever seen him tense. I had laughed it off. "You think I scare that easily?" He smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. "I just don't want you getting hurt. The floorboards up there are weak. Promise me you won't go in?" I had promised, and for a while I didn't think about it. Now, with Valentine's Day approaching, I was giddy with anticipation. It was my first Valentine's Day with someone who actually cared about me, and Daniel had made it clear he had something special planned. I spent the week leading up to it daydreaming about what he might do. A candlelit dinner? A surprise jetaway? The possibilities sent butterflies fluttering through my stomach. I've never had a real Valentine's before. I admitted to him one evening as we sat curled up on his couch. A fire crackled in the fireplace, bathing the room in flickering golden light. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Never." I shook my head. "Not even in high school. I mean, I got those little candygrams from classmates, but no one ever, did anything special." His expression softened. He reached out, tracing his fingers along my jaw. "Then I guess I'll have to make this one unforgettable." My heart swelled. Valentine's Day had never meant much to me before. It had always been just another day, something I watched from the outside, like pressing my face against the glass of a store window, looking at something I'd never have. But tonight was different. Daniel had asked me to come over for a private dinner at his house, and from the moment I stepped inside, it felt like something out of a dream. The dining room was bathed in candlelight, the soft glow reflecting off the polished wooden table. A vase of deep red roses sat in the center, their petals lush and velvety, their scent filling the air. The fireplace crackled gently in the next room, sending flickering shadows dancing across the walls. And then there was Daniel, standing at the kitchen entrance, a knowing smile on his lips as he wiped his hands on a dish towel. "Happy Valentine's Day, Lily." I could hardly speak. No one had ever done something like this for me before. "You cooked." I finally managed, taking in the plates of beautifully prepared food on the table. A rich, steaming dish that smelled like garlic and wine, perfectly arranged on porcelain plates. Daniel chuckled. "I had some help," he admitted. I'm not exactly a master chef, but I wanted tonight to be special. My heart squeezed in my chest. It already was. Dinner was perfect. We talked, we laughed, and I felt myself slipping further into something dangerous, something terrifying in its intensity. Love. Daniel listened to me like no one else ever had, his attention completely on me. The way he leaned in when I spoke, the way his fingers brushed over mine when I reached for my wine glass. Everything about him made me feel like I was the only person in the world. By the time dessert was over, my cheeks were warm from the wine, and my stomach ached from laughing. And then he reached into his pocket. "I got you something." I watched as he pulled out a small velvet box and set it in front of me. A gift. My fingers trembled slightly as I picked it up, my pulse quickening. I had never received anything like this before. Never had a moment where someone looked at me like I was worth giving something special to. I lifted the lid. Inside was a delicate gold locket in the shape of a heart. I gasped. It was beautiful, simple and elegant, the kind of thing a girl in a storybook would receive from the man who adored her. I swallowed hard, touched beyond words. "Daniel, this is..." His lips curled into a soft smile. "Open it." I did. Inside, there was already a tiny photograph. A picture of us, taken a few weeks ago when we had spent the day at a bookstore. I remembered the moment well. I had been laughing at something ridiculous, and he had snapped a candid picture on his phone. I hadn't even known he had printed it. Tears stung the back of my eyes. No one had ever loved me like this. "I wanted you to have something to keep close," Daniel murmured. I looked at him, my throat tight with emotion. "I love it," I whispered. He reached forward, unclasping the chain and fastening it around my neck. The locket was warm against my skin, resting just above my heart. I placed my hand over it and for the first time in my life, felt cherished. After dinner, we moved to the living room, curling up on the couch in front of the fire. Daniel poured us each another glass of wine, and we sat there together, my head resting against his shoulder, his fingers absent-mindedly tracing circles on my arm. The warmth of the room, the wine, the steady rhythm of his breathing, it was all so intoxicating. At some point, he let out a deep sigh and leaned back against the cushions. "Tired?" I asked softly, tilting my head to look at him. Daniel smiled, his eyelids heavy. "Yeah, I guess all that cooking took it out of me." I laughed. "You mean all that pretending to cook?" He chuckled but didn't deny it. His head lolled slightly, his body relaxing against mine. Within minutes, he was asleep. I should have just let myself drift off too. Should have stayed there, wrapped up in the warmth of the moment. But instead, I thought about the attic. It started as a whisper in the back of my mind, a quiet, nagging thought that refused to let go. Why was the attic off limits? I had never been one to question things before. When you grow up in foster care, you learn not to push boundaries, not to ask the wrong questions. It keeps you out of trouble. But tonight, something felt different. Maybe it was the wine, or maybe it was the way Daniel had finally let his guard down, fast asleep against me. Maybe it was just curiosity. I glanced at him, his breathing slow and steady. This was my chance. Carefully, I shifted out from under him, making sure not to wake him. I stood, my heart pounding, and turned toward the hallway, toward the attic. The wooden staircase groaned beneath my weight as I climbed, each step like a whispered warning in the silence of the house. My breath came shallow, my pulse an unsteady rhythm against my ribs. It was colder up here, much colder. The moment I reached the attic door, I hesitated. The air around it felt wrong, like standing too close to something decayed, something that wasn't meant to be disturbed. I could still go back. Daniel was downstairs, sleeping peacefully, unaware that I had slipped away. He had been so sweet tonight, so perfect. This was stupid, and yet, my hand moved before I could stop myself, my fingers wrapping around the door handle. I twisted, unlocked. The door creaked open, revealing darkness. A thick, suffocating kind of dark, swallowing everything beyond the threshold. The smell hit me instantly, sharp, metallic, rotten. I wrinkled my nose, stepping inside. The floor was wooden, but unlike the polished beauty of the rest of the house, it was rough beneath my bare feet, splintered and uneven. I moved cautiously, squinting through the dark as my fingers fumbled along the wall. There's something cool and smooth. I flipped the switch. A single, weak bulb flickered to life above me, casting sickly yellow light over the room. I froze. The attic was not what I expected. There were no old trunks, no forgotten furniture covered in sheets. Instead, wooden shelves lined the walls, packed tightly with glass jars. I frowned, stepping closer. The liquid inside them was cloudy, murky thick. Shadows swirled just beneath the surface. I reached out, hesitant, running my fingers over the surface of one of the jars. It was ice cold. Then my foot nudged something. I looked down. Another jar, slightly smaller than the rest, rolled against my toes. It must have fallen at some point, knocked from its place on the shelf. I bent down, lifting it carefully. Something was floating inside. I brought it closer to my face, tilting it toward the light. And then I saw it. A heart, suspended in thick, yellowed liquid, its veins still visible, curling like delicate black vines. I dropped the jar. My breath strangled itself in my throat as I stumbled back, my heel catching on a loose floorboard. No, 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 no. My stomach twisted violently, and I slapped a hand over my mouth, willing myself not to throw up. This can't be real. I turned, desperate to get away from the shelf, only to find another one behind me. And another. And another. Jars. Dozens of them, each containing the same thing. I let out a shaky breath, my legs trembling beneath me. That was when I saw the altar. It sat in the center of the attic, low to the ground, made of dark, weathered wood. Candles surrounded it. Their wax melted down to the floorboards, hardened in uneven streaks of red. And on the altar, photographs. Old, yellowed pictures arranged neatly, staring back at me like ghosts from another time. My chest tightened. They were all women, and they all looked like me. My hands shook as I reached forward, my fingers grazing one of the photos. The edges were curled, the ink faded, but the resemblance was unmistakable. Pale skin, dark hair, the same hollowed-out eyes. I snatched another picture, then another, flipping them over with increasing panic. Beneath each one was a date. February 14th. Every single one. This wasn't storage. This wasn't junk. This was a graveyard. Panic wrapped its fingers around my throat, crushing, suffocating. I have to get out of here. My legs finally obeyed, carrying me backward, stumbling, shaking. I turned too quickly, my elbow clipping one of the shelves. Crash! A jar tumbled from the top row, smashing against the ground. The thick liquid splattered across the floorboards, mixing with something dark and congealed. My heart nearly stopped. The bed creaked downstairs. A soft inhale. Daniel. I held my breath. For a single frozen moment, there was nothing. No movement. No sound. Then, footsteps. Slow. Deliberate. Moving toward the stairs. My chest tightened as I turned, my hands searching blindly for the light switch. If I could just turn it off, if I could hide. My body moved before my mind could catch up. Run. I turned and bolted, my feet pounding against the attic floor as I lunged for the staircase. The single, flickering bulb overhead cast my shadow in jagged, frantic shapes against the walls. Daniel didn't chase me. Not yet. He simply stood there, watching, waiting. That was somehow worse. I gripped the railing, nearly tripping over my own feet as I scrambled down the attic steps. My breath came in sharp, panicked gasps, my heart hammering so loudly I could feel it in my fingertips. I made it halfway down before I froze. Daniel was already at the bottom of the stairs. He hadn't run. He hadn't lunged past me. And yet, there he was, like he had always been standing there, like he knew I had nowhere else to go. "You shouldn't have done that," he murmured. His voice was soft, almost disappointed. I swallowed hard, my legs trembling beneath me. He took a single step forward. That's when I saw it. The knife. It gleamed in his hand, reflecting the dim glow of the hallway light. Long, thin, the kind of blade meant for precision. "I really, really liked you, Lily." His voice was calm. Too calm. "I thought you were different." Something snapped inside me. "Run. Now." I shoved past him. Daniel moved fast, too fast, his fingers snagging the hem of my sweater. I twisted, wrenching free, nearly losing my balance as I stumbled into the hallway. A crash. The side table by the stairs toppled as I shoved it behind me, sending a ceramic lamp shattering to the floor. I sprinted into the living room, my eyes darting wildly for an escape. The front door, 20 feet away. I lunged for it, my fingers already reaching for the handle when, pain, a weight slammed into me from behind, sending me crashing to the ground. My chin struck the hardwood, a burst of white-hot pain erupting behind my eyes. Daniel was on me in an instant, pinning me down. His breath was warm against my ear. "Steady. You should have just let it be," he whispered. I bucked wildly, thrashing beneath him, my nails clawing at the floor. He was stronger, but I had desperation. I drove my knee into his stomach with everything I had. Daniel let out a guttural gasp, his grip loosening for just a second. Enough time. I twisted free, scrambling to my feet. He reached for me, fingers brushing my ankle. I kicked him in the face. His head snapped back, blood spurting from his nose. I didn't wait to see if he recovered. I ran. I burst through the front door, barefoot, breathless, terrified. The night air was sharp against my skin, the cold searing my lungs. The driveway. My car. Keys. Where are my keys? I risked a glance over my shoulder. Daniel was already pushing himself up, staggering forward, blood dripping down his face. My purse. It was inside. My phone. My wallet. My keys. No time. I ran. The world blurred around me as I ran. My lungs burned. My vision tunneled on one thing. My car. I could hear Daniel behind me, footsteps pounding against the frozen ground. Not running. Walking. Like he knew I wasn't getting away. Like he was just waiting for me to fail. Not this time. I yanked the car door open, flung myself inside, and slammed it shut just as Daniel's hand slapped against the window. My fingers fumbled with the keys, heart thrashing against my ribs. Come on, come on, come on. The engine roared to life. Daniel's face was inches from mine, separated by only a thin pane of glass. His lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. His voice was muffled, but I could still hear it. "Lily." I threw the car into reverse and hit the gas. The tires screamed against the pavement as I spun out of the driveway, nearly careening into the mailbox. My headlights sliced through the darkness, illuminating the long, empty road ahead. I didn't look back. My hands shook violently as I gripped the steering wheel, trying to keep the car steady. I could barely breathe. My skin felt too tight, my entire body trembling with adrenaline. I fumbled for my phone, my fingers clumsy and cold. 911. The call rang once before a voice answered. 911. What's your emergency? I swallowed hard, my throat raw. "He's going to kill me." "Ma'am, who's trying to hurt you?" "My boyfriend," I choked out. "Daniel. His name is Daniel." And I stopped. I realized something terrifying. I had no idea what his last name was. By the time the police arrived at Daniel's house, he was gone. But the attic? The attic was still there. The officers found everything. The jars, the hearts, the altar, with its melted candles and yellowed photographs. The names of the women, their faces, all of them eerily similar. All of them gone. Some of the dates stretched back 20 years. I sat in the back of the patrol car, a thick blanket wrapped around my shoulders, as I listened to the officers murmur to each other. One of them turned to me, his face pale. "We ran his name through the system," he said carefully. "Daniel," he hesitated. "That name belongs to a man who's been dead for 5 years." I blinked. "What?" "He stole someone's identity. There's no record of him before that. No birth certificate. No driver's license. Nothing." A chill crawled up my spine. Who the hell had I been dating? Weeks passed. I moved. A new city, a new job, a new apartment, as far away from that house as possible. I told myself I was safe now. That Daniel, whoever he really was gone. That the nightmare was over. I almost started to believe it. Until February 14th. The package arrived in the morning. Small. Plain. No return address. I stared at it for a long time before picking it up. It was cold. My stomach twisted as I peeled away the brown paper wrapping, my fingers suddenly numb. Inside was a glass jar. At first, I didn't understand. The liquid inside was murky, thick. A shadow floated just beneath the surface. No! I knew what this was. A human heart. My breath hitched, while rising in my throat. There was a note tucked neatly beside it. In his handwriting, "I should have chosen you. You were my favorite." The world spun around me. I staggered backward, the jar slipping from my hands. It shattered against the floor. A thick, wet sound, and the heart. It rolled toward me. Thanks for watching. If you like the story, click like, subscribe to the channel, and write an idea for the next story in the comments.